video camera break down?
No, just my brain.
What's on your mind?
I want to do a video for my school project, but I don't know what to do it on.
How about volcanoes?
Been there. Remember I did that project in grade 5? Anyway, there's not too many volcanoes to film in Toronto.
How about dinosaurs? You have dozens of plastic ones.
Dinosaurs? Do I look like Steven Spielberg?
Well...
I've been thinking about doing it on Cabbagetown, but where do I find the information?
Well, I think I may just have something to solve your problem. I have just the book for you. Touring Old Cabbagetown. And here's another one. Cabbagetown Remembered. With these, you'll have all the facts you need. And look here. This one even has a picture of our house in it.
This is great, Dad. Dad, do you want to help me with my project?
Not if my job's going to be looking up names and dates. Besides, this is your project anyway.
Cabbagetown is one of Toronto's oldest neighborhoods. It's just east of Toronto's downtown and beside the Don Valley. Some of the buildings here are over 150 years old. Nobody seems to agree on how big and exactly where the boundaries of Cabbagetown really are. Old Cabbagetown used to start at Queen Street. Before the English arrived, the native Canadians and the French settlers visited the Don River. One of the earliest homes was the home of Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe. He built a cottage on top of the hill overlooking the Don River. He called it Castle Frank for his son Francis. As you can see, it's not a castle but a log cabin, with logs cut to stand in front to make it look special. Who are you?
My name is Elizabeth Postuma Simcoe. My husband was the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. That is one of my drawings. I asked the soldiers to build Castle Frank high on a hill so there would always be a breeze to keep away those pesky mosquitoes. Then the soldiers cut a trail through the woods down to the lake so we could ride or hike there.
Yes, Mrs. Simcoe. That trail is now called Parliament Street.
But the easiest way to get to Castle Frank was to go by boat up the Don River. Where the river meets the lake, it was 60 feet across and full of salmon, trout, and catfish. The giant pine trees that grew on our property were 170 feet high. My husband wanted to keep these trees, so he deeded the property from the trail, or Parliament Street as you called it, down to the Don River to our son, Francis. There should be a picture of Francis there in your book.
Where'd she go? So we have the Simcoes to thank for saving so many of our trees in Cabbagetown. This tree is over 300 years old. You can see it in a little park just north of Bloor Street, quite close to the bridge. I hope a car doesn't hit it. Between 1841 and 1861, Toronto really started to grow. Many people from Europe started to arrive, especially the Irish, who came here to get away from the potato famine. Some of the Irish immigrants lived in workers' cottages in Cabbagetown. Because they didn't have enough food in Ireland, they planted potatoes, turnips, carrots, and cabbages in their front yards in Canada. These vegetables could be stored and would be eaten over the winter. As potatoes, turnips, and carrots grow underground, only the cabbages were seen by people going by. So the area was called Cabbagetown. This was meant as a put-down. Do you know that way back then, some of the stores had signs in their windows saying, "Clerk wanted, no Irish need apply." As you can see, these cottages are only 1.5 stories high. The ceilings on the second floor would be sloped because these rooms are just under the roof. Often, 2 families would share the one house. They didn't have furnaces or indoor toilets. Workers' cottages were built on many streets throughout Cabbagetown. Some were only 10 feet wide. 10 feet is double this width. This house is the narrowest house in Toronto, only 8 foot 3 inches wide. Early Cabbagetown was a lot different from today. Some of the men from the workers' cottages worked in this very spot. Right here was a factory, the PR Lamb Manufactory. It made glues and polishes for wood stoves. Imagine the smells and noises coming from that factory. It must have been gross. The factory owner, Mr. Lamb, lived on Winchester Street. The old house is still here, but in 1877, Mr. Lamb's son Daniel had an addition put on the front and this fence around the property. So now it is a grand house, and you really can't see the original house. Lots of movies have been made here. There are many other great houses in Cabbagetown. This house, also on Winchester Street, was built in 1857. There was a door in the middle of the first floor, and everything that is on one side is the same on the other side. This is called a Georgian house. Now, this really fancy Victorian house at 286 Carlton Street was built in 1883. Everything is at angles. Check out the metal fancy stuff above the windows and on the roof. On the other side of the street is a house made entirely of yellow brick. This brick was expensive, and it came all the way from the United States. So if your house was yellow brick, people would think you're rich. The style of this row of houses is called Romanesque Revival. It's called that because of the arched doors and windows. Look at the great stained glass at the top of the window. Old City Hall and the Legislative Building at Queen's Park are also built in this style. This house hasn't lasted as well as the previous ones. Raccoons moved into the top floor, so the person who owned the house had the top floor taken off. But wow, look at those carvings. When you look at this one, you know why this house is called the Owl House. Talking of raccoons and owls reminds me of over 100 years ago. Daniel Lamb. Remember him? He used to own that smelly factory and lived at 146 Winchester Street. Well, he decided that Toronto should have a zoo. He talked his friends into donating some wolves and deers, and Riverdale Zoo was started. A few years later, more animals were donated. On the first weekend that the lion and elephants were displayed, 20,000 people came to see them. The people came by horse-drawn streetcars up Parliament and along Winchester to the zoo. Then the operator would take the horse off the front of the streetcar, walk it around to the back, connect it up, and the horse would pull the streetcar back the way it came. There was only one set of tracks along Winchester Street. In 1974, the zoo closed and moved to North Scarborough. In 1979, the present Riverdale Farm opened on the same site. This tower is about all that remains of the old zoo. The animals at Riverdale Farm are not so wild, but you still have to be careful and obey the signs. Cows are big. Did you know that Cabbagetown even had its own hospitals? Between 1856 and 1914, The Toronto General Hospital was on the north side of Girard between Sackville and Sumac. The hospital was built here because they wanted to keep the germs away from the people of Toronto, and this area was the suburbs. The only thing wandering around this area were cows. The hospital was a huge 4-story building that looked like a Gothic castle. When it first opened, there were 250 patients, and they were cared for by 8 staff. The hospital was torn down, and now the Toronto General Hospital is at university and college. In 1883, Canadian medical schools wouldn't let women attend. Shame, shame. They thought that medicine was too tough for women and that the sight of the human body would cause them to faint. So, a group of women started the Ontario Medical College for Women at 289 Sumac Street. In 1906, the Women's College moved near College and Bay Streets. This building was then turned into a machine shop, and it is now condominium apartments. A medical school for men, Trinity College, was built here in 1871. Many funny stories have been told about these students. One Halloween night, Parliament Street shoppers saw a man's body hanging from meat hooks in Silk's butcher shop. When the police arrived, they found out that the body has been preserved with formaldehyde. Eventually, the police found out that a Trinity College student placed it here as a Halloween joke. I wonder if any of them got suspended. I'm sure other Cabbagetown students behaved a lot better than that. The Enoch Turner School was the first free school in Toronto. It was named after the man who built it. Before it opened in 1848, the parents had to pay for their children to go to school. The school closed when the Sackville School was built. The first Sackville School was built here in 1887 at 19 Sackville and Eastern. It is the oldest school in Toronto still being used. Look at the walls. Did you know that they are red brick and pollution has turned it dark gray? In 1975, its name was changed to Inglenook School. Another important thing happened in Toronto schools in 1887. A Toronto bylaw was passed to use a rubber strap on children who were bad at school. Luckily for me, the strap was outlawed in Toronto schools over 20 years ago. The first Rose School was built in 1883. It wasn't a little school, though. It had 10 classrooms. In 1920, it was torn down and this school was built. Let's look at its stained glass window. The Parents Association had it installed in 1923 as a memorial to the soldiers who fought in the First World War, or the Great War as they called it. Park School was opened in 1853. However, a new school was built in 1914. It had separate schoolyards for girls and boys. Did I tell you, Dad, that when I was doing my research, I found out that the first Winchester School was a 2-room wooden schoolhouse, and it was built in 1874, and then the new building was built in 1901, and then the senior public school building in 1959.
Did you know that over 20 years ago that this school had a fire, and they closed it for a whole year, and all of the children had to go to school in portables?
In the first quarter of the century, there were no playgrounds for children. As there were very few cars, kids played on the streets and back lanes. In the summer, kids liked to go fishing and skinny dipping in the Don River. The Don River must have been a lot cleaner in those days. Boys played football and soccer using real pig's bladders, not like the $30 footballs used now. Only the richest kid then would have a bicycle. In the winter, the Don became a giant skating rink, and it was even used as a road by people in horse-drawn sleighs. Boy, I guess things haven't changed much on this hill. Kids and parents tobogganed then and now. Though then, races were held using bobsleds up to 24 feet long. Dufferin School opened in 1877 with 687 students. It was a large 3-story building. Dufferin School was torn down in 1925, and this school, Lord Dufferin School, was built here. This plaque is all that is left of Dufferin School. The original school here was built in 1891. It was called St. John's Catholic School, and it was a 2-room schoolhouse. Then in 1913, the name was changed to Our Lady of Lourdes. Then the name was changed to St. Martin's, and in 1922, the school was built. This 1891 building has been 3 things. First, St. Enoch's Church, then the Donvale Community Center, and now the Toronto Dance School and Theatre. It's a busy place with people coming for their lessons. 1 week a year they have a dance festival. Things were really rough in Cabbagetown in the 1930s, when the Depression hit all of Canada. Big houses were changed into boarding houses, or small apartments. Small houses into 2 or 3 families to a house. Soup kitchens were set up in churches. In the valley along the Don River, a tent city was set up for men who had no work, money, or homes. Houses weren't fixed because any money in the house was needed for food. It was a bad time. Though I did read in one of the books that someone called them the golden years. I don't know. After the Second World War, the city of Toronto decided that they needed more public housing. They said, level the houses south of Gerrard and east of Parliament. These homes were very like the homes above Gerrard, but most of the houses were owned by people who didn't live there. The government paid them a small amount of money and then bulldozed the houses. During the next 5 years, Regent Park was built. Over the last 20 years, there have been even more changes. Houses like this 1866 home have been fixed back to or better than they were built. Look at the great paint job. An 1858 barn from Markham was taken apart and reassembled at the Riverdale farm. Cattle, horses, chickens, and ducks are everywhere. There are different kinds of cattle which are not like the ones on modern farms. Even the fences are different. It's more like a museum, but with live animals. More single-family homes than ever. Children remember Cabbagetown's Victorian past by playing in costume. Riverdale Park has so many dogs and devoted owners that they have their own dog directory. As Cabbagetown grew, there were grocery stores in many of the corners. In those days, most groceries came from the farms around Toronto. Now corner stores are back in the neighborhood, though prices have really changed. Milk was 2 cents a bottle, and now it's $1.99. Wow! Houses have been torn down and then rebuilt, with other homes behind them. Even when the houses are new, the builders often try to make them look like the old Cabbagetown houses. Back lanes that were filled with garages now are filled with houses. A factory has been converted into 3 houses. No matter what has happened or will happen, residents of Cabbagetown still celebrate their love of the area. In May, there is the Forsythia Festival. It was a little chilly this year on Forsythia Sunday, but the kids and the dogs had fun. Another important date is the weekend after Labor Day. That's when we hold the Cabbagetown Festival. Local people are growing cabbages on their front lawns to show they are proud of living in Cabbagetown. I love Cabbagetown.
Okay? I know it's there, but it's no piano, no bass. Okay, we're gonna do a little bit faster. 1, 2.